So Heidi kind of runs our center of regions. She's fabulous. I highly recommend this channel.
Yes.
Okay. Are you too?
No, I'm in St. Louis. You're in St. Louis.
Oh, all right, of course. You're from the same. Right.
Yeah.
I'm down the
You're
street.
kind of having some, like, taking like little wins, or at least not wins, as possible, right?
So originally I had these I had these random visions of I had a whole bunch of friends in St. Louis.
And so, which one?
Was going to things
It's like the free.
Yeah, so like if, a Kawashi
prison to the
it's like CCC or something. Yeah, okay, amazing.
So we get together so and I just I want to know everything from tell me all the things I understand. Sounds really good.
Yeah, it is.
This would have been a nice
It's
weekend to be here, actually. It's kind of
Every day you wake up, it's like never know where you want to go. But the worst part of it just was
and you're flying back to California.
And then from LA.
That was the only reason I pushed this early flight too.
Yeah.
So
And that was happening like through what? Like how did that happen? Yeah.
I was like, I just don't want
Right, so it was so I was like, I don't know the official.
It was the state government.
It was the
the
state
state of
government.
I tell you. And then she sent me the reservation. I was like,
Because we're going to do some good stuff. The exact same thing, which is why we're already jumped out into just have kind of short topics because you have, and there will be trailers.
How are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I'm from National Constitutional Disability. Hi, Becky. Hi, Greg. Hi, your name is Laura.
So they do know what it is.
how are you?
Nice to meet you. It is. Yeah.
I just wanted to say,
Went on the JCPA had a chapter down at the border in Arizona. And I wrote an article coming here in December. And you know, they reached out to maybe get involved. I wanted to know any sort of but all this sort of canvas what's already going on in the community and then see what more like maybe what's like even just to set the network to disseminate information or maybe put together like an informational panel or some sort. So what I'm doing, I want to find out more about what's going on actually already in immigration. We're in a lot of
it'd be better, right? Yeah. Instead of the formal, yeah, right. I mean, we're talking about community, right? So, like, we
it's your project,
right? Like,
but
we're
maybe
moving.
sponsor
We're here.
I can give you my cards, I guess.
Thank you very much.
I know you have my info card.
Oh, thank you.
I just met two ladies.
Are you from this side?
Yeah, come she's an NCDW.
I am.
National. Well, you know, the national chair, her kids and my kids went to Hawkins together, so.
Really?
But it's winter's colder than usual.
Yeah.
It's like
No,
this winter's been really warm during the day.
And then she was in Cleveland.
I'm Sarah with Migrant.
It's the weapons.
Hi everyone, we're going to get started in 1 minute. 1 minute, we're going to be pretty fast
Yeah, right. Okay.
See how tough I was?
You're so involved.
But I'm going to let you have the fun.
Yeah,
Hi everyone, we're going to get started very soon. Can you all hear me without the mic? Yeah. Okay, I've never been accused of being quiet, so this is good. Okay, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the Welcoming the Stranger, the Case for Ending Criminalization, Detention, and Deportation workshop. It's an honor to be here with all of you this afternoon. My name is Naomi Steinberg, and I am the Vice President for Policy and Advocacy at HIAS, the American Jewish Community's refugee organization. I think that many of you in the room probably know a little bit about HIAS already. I'm going to just do a quick explanation so you know why I am here, and then I'll introduce our panelists and we'll dive right in. HIAS is about to celebrate our 140th anniversary next year. We were established on New York's Lower East Side to help Jews who are fleeing pogroms, and now more than a century later, we work in 15 countries. We are one of the 9 national refugee resettlement agencies, and of particular relevance for this panel, we also provide direct services to asylum seekers here in the DC area, in the New York area, and on both sides of the US-Mexico border. We're the only NGO that's working on the border that way, serving asylum seekers. Right now we have operations in Juarez, and in the coming weeks and months we'll start operations in Monterrey, and in Tijuana, and in Mexicali. Our work in Mexico is focused on providing legal support to asylum seekers who are stuck in Mexico because of the migration protection protocols, which I know our panelists will discuss, better known as the Remain in Mexico policy. And we're also piloting a remote program to provide counsel to individuals stuck in Mexico. And we're soon going to start offering psychosocial support and support for those who are survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. On the U.S. side of the border, we have legal fellows in San Diego and in El Paso, and we'll soon have one placed in Brownsville, Texas as well. HIAS's history is firmly rooted in the Jewish immigration story, and it is our religious mandate to welcome the stranger, a dictate that is found in the Torah one way or the other 36 times, which is more than any other. And we do not need to look far back in our own family histories to see this immigration story. It was not that long ago that our relatives came to the United States seeking safety for our families, just like today's asylum seekers are doing for theirs. As we like to say at HIAS, we used to help refugees because they were Jewish, and now we help refugees because we are Jewish. We will touch on this theme throughout the panel discussion, one that I think takes a unique and important look at a contemporary immigration policy with a special focus on asylum seekers, detention, and deportation. I'm really proud to be on this panel. We have a panel of rock stars with us, people who can share their perspectives from on the ground in Mexico to national policy debates and to local responses far away from the border. So first I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then they will each speak, and we want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So with no further ado, our first speaker is Emem Maurus. Emem is a Tijuana-based attorney with the Transgender Law Center, where they provide legal assistance and offer basic humanitarian services to LGBTQ asylum seekers in Mexico, and after they cross the United States. Emem previously served as a staff attorney, helping to run a daily clinic in Tijuana with Al Otro Lado, a legal and humanitarian support services organization. Emem is going to speak about their work in Tijuana and the U.S. asylum policies that directly impact their clients. Following Emem will be Heidi Altman. Heidi is the Director of Policy for the National Immigrant Justice Center, overseeing NIJC's legislative and policy advocacy on issues that impact immigrant communities, including immigration detention, enforcement, and access to asylum. Heidi is going to talk about immigration detention and how current U.S. immigration and detention policies are intersectional and intertwined with broader criminalization in the United States. And then last but not least, we have Elisa Bamford. She is the Director of Civic Engagement for the JCRC in St. Louis. Among other many projects she organizes, her largest annual programs are the Jewish and Muslim Day of Community Service and the Jewish Coalition for New Americans Day Camp at the International Institute. She's going to be sharing from her perspective how her work affects these issues, or how these issues affect her work, and how it intersects directly with what she is working on in St. Louis. So, Emem, I toss it to you.
All right. Hello, thank you so much for coming. It's really wonderful to look out and see a full room, especially where I'm at in Mexico. I read so many articles and stuff, but sometimes I'm like, is anyone reading these? Like, does anyone? And I know there's a lot to read these days. So, I want to talk very briefly about just what our project is. It's very new. And it's a lot of it is a response to Trump policies that have changed the way immigration works on the border, but I think LGBT folks have been migrating a long time. They're going to continue to migrate, irrespective, I believe, of who the next administration is in the United States. So it really does have a long-term vision. We don't yet have long-term funding, but we're working on that. But the idea really is to try and build out from Tijuana outward a network, both south through Central America, north to the United States, to try and make migration for LGBT folks who are forced to flee safer, try and instill a sense of community as people travel. So as people go, if they connect with other folks, knowing where to go, what's safe, when they get to Tijuana, trying to affect a little bit the dynamic sometimes between legal worker, lawyer, community member, and give people a lot more autonomy and agency in the process that they have very little agency and autonomy over. I think beyond those kind of larger goals and values, it's to try and, if we can, I'll talk about it in a second, but most people are forced to wait both in the south and the north of Mexico. We have kind of been like, all right, we don't agree with that for so many reasons, safety being the beginning, long-standing international law perhaps being the second. I don't know if I can order them, but those being the two biggest reasons. But since they're there, let's prepare their case before they go. Let's teach them how to fight their case if they end up in a place like Louisiana in detention, like more and more people are, so that they're able to do their case by themselves if they have to. Hopefully that makes their time in detention shorter. Hopefully it makes it a little safer, because if something starts to go wrong, they have someone they know they can reach out to. So I could go on, but I think that's the best summary I can give of the goal and what we're trying to implement. The other thing I'm really here for is to talk about policies affecting the border. Just to give you a sense, this is like the most recent, like what might happen to you if you cross the border, and I know some of you can't see it. The point is, I don't know how to do that in the next 2 minutes. And I don't think I totally need to, honestly. I am happy to talk to anyone ever, your synagogues, community groups, anything ever. I'm a geek about this, I love it. I want people to know what's happening. But I also think sometimes we can get lost in it. So I'm gonna try and spend about a minute talking about things you're gonna be like, I don't know what you're talking about, maybe, hopefully, but hopefully you do, and then kind of just talk about the basic themes that we're seeing. So first and foremost, people, for the most part, Mexico has basically acceded to what the United States has wanted. This is not new. There's been other times in Mexico where it's been incredibly difficult to transit through Mexico. This is definitely, though, one of those times. So we're finding more and more that people are being violently pushed back, really, from the southern border of Mexico. Those who get through are spending 3, 4, 5, 6 months in very dangerous places in southern Mexico, just trying to get a visa to get to the north. And there's a ton more to say about that, but I'll leave it there. If they get to the north, I had a client about 2 days ago say there were 36 roadblocks between Tapachula in the very south of Mexico to Tijuana, where she was going. Every single one, she was stopped, she was harassed, she was asked for identification. That is the bus route from north to south, and that's before we get into all the different ways someone might transit from south to north. You get to the north, you put your name on a list. That list is currently under litigation, but you are going to wait upwards of, depending, can be not much time, it can be all the way up to 6 months, 7 months. So you are then asked to somehow survive in the north without work authorization, your moment has come, you crossed. And again, like some people might cross informally in different ways. All of the policies I'm about to talk about, I think it's worth saying, it does not matter how you enter the United States. You have a legal right to ask for asylum. All of these policies might then affect you. And I'm going to try and do this in a minute. The first thing that might happen is you do what happened all the time, they put you in removal proceedings. That's probably the least likely thing that's going to happen to you. What removal proceedings means, you have your asylum case. That might be in detention, you might be released, all kinds of things. Gets beyond border policy. The second thing that might happen, which has been the most common in the past 10 plus years, is you're given an interview to make an initial determination of whether or not you're afraid to return home. If you pass that, we used to call it a credible fear interview. It's a little complicated now. A reasonable fear interview. And if you pass that, you are placed into removal proceedings. Again, you have your asylum case. In the past 14, 15 months, the first thing that happened January 29th, 2019, we just passed the 1-year anniversary, is what's called Migrant Protection Protocol, Remain in Mexico. It's the exact same thing. You cross. You're not given an interview, but you are given a court date. Okay, congratulations, you have your asylum case. We're sending you back to Mexico. So people are then being asked, without really access to legal services, anything else, to fight their case from Mexico. They're allowed to come into Mexico for their case and then return. A lot to say about that, but in terms of just safety, access to legal, access to translations, I mean, some of the most basic things. Next up, next up is, there's a newer thing it's called PACER and HARP, depending on where you're from. This is the most recent thing that's happened. It's called Humanitarian Asylum Review Process for Mexicans, for Central Americans, Prompt Asylum Claim Review. That is actually taking it a step further and saying, you cross, we're going to put you in a Customs and Border Protection office on the border. You're not going to have access to counsel, you're not going to have access to phone calls, and you're going to be in these little tiny temporary holding cells. We are going to adjudicate your entire case in a week with CBP, not asylum officers, no judicial anything, and most likely you're going to be returned. or rather not returned, deported. There are no official implementation guidelines for this. There's no administrative policies, nothing. Next up, some of you might have heard, is you might get returned to Guatemala. You can then go to Guatemala, ask for asylum in Guatemala. That applies to everyone but Mexicans and Guatemalans. So I'm going to stop there because I'm way over.
It's okay. It's important information, and we will leave plenty of time for questions.
I'm going to stop there, but I will say all of these apply to different people in different ways. Like, I'm not going to get into all of that, the various exceptions. But I would just say that there's generally a targeting of Central Americans, and that's not in line or proportionate to fraudulent asylum claims or anything else. It's just purely race-based, hate mongering. It is inhumane and contrary to international law, every single thing I just told you. I mean, just having watched the effects of this over the past few years, migration has always been tough. But this is like kind of off the charts. And I think it's out of line with who hopefully most of us would want to be. I truly believe if most people knew, even my Trumpian relatives, might say this is even a step too far. I honestly believe that if they actually knew. Maybe I'm naive, but okay, sorry.
No, thank you. That was a really helpful framing for the rest of the conversation. Heidi?
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. So I just want to echo the thanks to all of you for electing to come to this session. And I am at the work on the border right now is actually an act of absorbing trauma for those of you who are doing the work like you are. And so I want to express gratitude for that. So I'm going to zoom us from the border to Virginia for a minute. So I am the director of policy for an organization called the National Immigrant Justice Center. We're primarily a legal services shop out of Chicago, but we also have a small office in San Diego, and we have our small office here in DC where we're doing federal advocacy. So I'm going to tell a little story. Bear with me. For this story, I'm going to do something that's like, just, bear with me for a moment here. Either close your eyes or keep them open. I want you to think about a newborn baby who you love and the moment when you met them. So for those of you who have a child, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, or the child of your dearest friend, whoever that first infant is that comes to mind, just close your eyes for a moment and remember the tactile experience of when you met that baby. Is everyone there? Okay. So I'm going to tell you about my friend Melissa. Melissa grew up in Front Royal. Have any of you been there? It's in the Shenandoah Valley. It's a small little town, good pizza shops and stuff in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. She grew up there. She went to school there. When she was in high school, she met this guy named Kanault. And Kanault is a former client of mine. He came to the United States from Jamaica when he was 11. He came on a lawful path. He came with his green card. He went to high school in Front Royal. He was the captain of the wrestling team. They became high school sweethearts. They went to the prom. They got married. It was a very sweet story. But they would tell me about what it was like being high school sweethearts in Front Royal. She is white. He's a Jamaican immigrant with an accent, a black man in a town that has a reputation for a lot of hostility towards anyone who is not white. It was very hard for them. And the way Kanault describes it is that he felt like he had a target on his back all the time. He would often find that he was just trailed by some local cops for no reason. So he smoked some marijuana in high school, like no judgments, but perhaps some of us have. Perhaps some of us have children who have. But he was arrested for it multiple times, and he ended up with 2 convictions in his late teens. He served a couple months in jail. And then life moved on, and he and Melissa got jobs. They started focusing on contributing to their community and their family, and they decided they were ready, and Melissa got pregnant. And months into the pregnancy, Kanault was a witness to a crime, and the local police asked him to come in and help them with the investigation, and he did. And in exchange, they called ICE. And ICE came and took him into a detention center, and I'm going to talk about what that means in a minute. You remember that Melissa was pregnant. And so that memory you have of meeting that newborn, the way that Kanault met his first and only child was through the glass partition in the immigration jail where Melissa came after she got out of the hospital where she gave birth by herself and held their baby up for him to meet him. Kanault was in that jail for a year before he was deported. Months after he was deported, the Supreme Court issued a decision that changed the law so that technically he should have been eligible to ask for a waiver of that deportation, but ICE would have to agree for him to come back to be able to make that case now. So we fought and fought and fought to get ICE to agree to that. And then the election happened, and on Inauguration Day, Melissa was actually here in DC with me, and that was the day that we knew that we had to give up hope, at least for the next 4 years. Davario, their son, is 6 now, and so he's being raised by a single mom because our government really took his father away. They talk by phone whenever they can. So I'm telling you this story because I want to again zoom out of the bazillion labyrinth technicalities that are immigration law today, and just really focus on the fact that we're living in a time when our government and its leaders are very intentionally sowing hatred and disdain towards those who are defined as the other, right? And as Jews, I think we know very well what it means to be painted as the other, and historically have been in that category so many times, tragically. Today, immigrants are on the top of that list. So I want to talk about facts for a second, because I think that's more important than ever, right? So as you heard from Emem, our government, our president right now would have us believe that Central American asylum seekers arriving at the border are fraudsters. They're here to try to take advantage. But studies and evidence and our own experiences tell us that, in fact, the overwhelming majority of asylum seekers at the southern border meet the international definition of refugee. They're desperately in need of our country's protection. Similarly, our government and our president would have us believe that if we open our communities and our neighborhoods to immigrants, that we are somehow opening ourselves up to danger. But the truth, borne out by evidence-driven studies, data, shows that in fact there's no correlation between citizenship status or immigration status and proclivity to crime. Studies show that in cities and states where law enforcement closely cooperates with federal immigration enforcement, there is no reduction in crime and may in fact lead to an increase in crime. Immigrants make our communities richer and more vibrant. They make us more whole as a community. So what does immigration enforcement look like today? And I think I'm probably running out of time, so I'm just going to do this real quick. This is a picture that I took of an immigration jail in a little town called Milan, New Mexico. I don't know if you can see it all the way in the back. But I just think it's really important to be confronted when we hear about 40,000 to 50,000 immigrants in jail on any given day. It's not a welcoming center. It's not a processing or welcoming center for asylum seekers. It's a huge private prison complex or a local county jail contracting with ICE. And the people behind those rolls of concertina wires are asylum seekers brought from the border or the airports who are working with Emem and other colleagues along the border, or they are folks like Knault who are longtime members of our communities who are taken in. It doesn't have to be this way, and so we can talk a lot about what we can all do to change it and to revert our society and our neighborhoods to a place that are welcoming. I'm going to just throw out 3 ways I think all of us, I would ask you all to consider taking actions today. One is talk about it. If you have the opportunity to deliver a sermon, if you're leading a Seder, if you're having friends over for dinner, talk about this. It is so hard, but we have to. It is incumbent on us. The second is visit an immigration jail. See what it's like inside. I have business cards here, and I would love to connect any one of you with a visitation group in your community. And the third is reach out to your elected officials and encourage your friends and family to do so, and demand that they look at our budget as a moral document, our federal budget, and cut funds for immigration, detention, and enforcement, divest from these hateful policies, and invest in our communities. And we can talk a lot more, of course, about what those policies look like, but I'll end there for now.
Thank you. Alyssa, can you talk to us a little bit about what your work in St. Louis includes and how it relates to the panel's topic, please?
Absolutely. So thank you all so much for being here to talk about a really difficult and very large topic. It's quite overwhelming. So our JCRC in St. Louis focuses on 2 primary areas, one of them being immigration. And within that, we work kind of on immigration on all sides. So we work on immigration at the border. We work on immigration with the Refugee Resettlement Agency. We work on immigration by supporting our local foreign-born communities. And we do this because, well, a lot of reasons. But the first, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love them as yourself, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. Right? From Leviticus, telling us right there, we need to focus on this. And then the other reason is that the St. Louis JCRC believes that the future of the Jewish community is directly intertwined with the fate of the wider region. We believe that we are stronger in relationship, we believe that we are safer in relationship, and we believe that we are better in relationship. So we developed a coalition called the Jewish Coalition for New Americans, and our mission statement is this: we provide a unified Jewish response to welcoming immigrants, migrants, and refugees. We support and supplement the work of agencies across the St. Louis region and provide volunteer assistance when opportunities arise. So notice that I didn't say we decide what we're going to work on. No, we work in collaboration with local direct service agencies who are supporting or are advocating for or representative of the immigrant population in St. Louis. So some of the ways we get involved, and I'm hoping by sharing some of these ways that we get involved that some of your cities will also be inspired to get involved. Maybe you're already doing some work, and thank you for that if you are. But if not, maybe you can take a few ideas with you. So we sit on an immigration policy table run by the ACLU and other local nonprofits, where we actively develop campaigns based on proposed legislation we either want to support or kill. We show up in our state capitol an hour and a half away to meet with our elected officials, and we testify on legislation. Even recently, we have a proposed anti-sanctuary bill in Missouri, and our practicum student testified on behalf of the St. Louis Jewish community, gave beautiful, beautiful testimony, and was met with, "So you want to allow criminals in our state?" Yeah. He handled it wonderfully, and was the news even picked it up, and it's been in newspapers across the state, and we're hoping that his response and his courage to that horrible question encourages others to stand up and say, you know what, you're wrong. We also organized a 14-hour overnight bus trip to Fort Sill, Oklahoma to protest the opening of a new child detention center. We had 100 participants, and our Jewish Federation helped sponsor the trip. With a board member and one of our Federation's vice presidents, we participated in the JCPA trip to the border to see firsthand what was happening. We did outreach to engage the Missouri evangelical community to encourage our conservative governor to allow refugee resettlement in the state after the executive order was announced that it was a state-by-state decision. And I'm very happy to say that he did send in a letter of support. We marched 7 miles in the rain for a pilgrimage to support a local man in sanctuary at a church. And we participate in an ICE watch group to document ICE interactions while helping support the terrorized and traumatized foreign-born in our community. Now lastly, I'll tell you about our largest program, that is our JCNA Day Camp, which I am so thrilled to say is receiving the Program Excellence Award this year at the JCPA conference. The camp. In 2017, when the travel ban was enacted, the local Refugee Resettlement Agency, the International Institute of St. Louis, called the JCRC, and they said, okay, we need help. We're getting flooded with calls from Jews across St. Louis saying, how do we get involved? How do we volunteer? How can we help you? And the International Institute was like, well, okay, we want to capture all of these people, but we don't have the bandwidth to place all of them in individual volunteer roles. So they called the JCRC in, and we brainstormed and identified a problem area where over the summer, when school is out, parents who need to focus on developing their English skills, usually within the first 3 months of arriving in the United States, it's crucial to get those skills. Over the summer, they were staying home to take care of their children. And so they weren't able to go to classes to develop their English skills. And as Jews, we know summer camps. And thus our program was born. We know summer camps. So this past summer was our 3rd year. It's a 4-week half-day camp held at the International Institute during English class times. We have an average of 50 campers, and 1 year we maxed out at 200 volunteers. We have to use gestures and small words most of the time to communicate, but it is so amazing being able to interact with these children. So I'll tell you a quick story, and then I'll wrap up. So the 2nd year of camp, I remember a returning camper, his name is Jimmy, and Jimmy was just, stone cold cool guy, right? Coming in with his straight face, and he never actually laughed or smiled unless we were joking with him and no one else was looking. One day at camp, we hired superhero impersonators. They came into the room and Jimmy had his no-nonsense face on. The superheroes spoke about qualities that make superheroes great. And they also talked about superheroes within our own communities. Doctors, lawyers, policemen, firemen. One child even called out that his mom was his superhero. It was adorable. Yep. So after the presentation, I was taking pictures of the children with the superheroes. Jimmy comes up and goes up to this 6', 5" tall Superman, really looked like Superman, tugs on his arm, and I'll never forget what Jimmy said. In his thick Congolese accent, he asked Superman, "Can you fly to my country and fix it so that I can go home?" Right? That has stuck with me and will probably stick with me for the rest of my life. So if you're wondering how to tackle this huge issue that's overwhelming, the most important thing is just to show up and to build relationships. And you know what happens when you're in real relationships is that when a nonprofit organization is approached by a lay leader or a volunteer saying, like, we want to join this BDS march, or we want to join this anti-Israel march, we should get involved, the organization calls you and says, hey, what's the background on this? Can you give me some more information? How should I handle this? It's a two-way street. And in that, we're combating anti-Semitism, we're helping vulnerable communities, and we're making ourselves stronger because we're together. So if you want to brainstorm what you can do in your communities, I have my cards, you can have my contact information, stop by our table in the exhibit hall. I'd love to talk more.
Thank you. And we might actually have some time in here to do some brainstorming together, so I don't want to let folks out of the room without hearing some good ideas about what you want to do in your own communities. So I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask a couple questions myself of these panelists, and then we're going to open it up for all of you. Because I do advocacy work, I'm a little bit biased, and I'm particularly interested in talking about advocacy right now. And so this is for all three of you, really, so feel free to jump in. Given the complexity of these issues and how almost every day we wake up and there is a new policy with which we're grappling, a new attack on immigrant communities, how would you prioritize? What are your top advocacy issues right now? And what would you tell the folks in the room they can do from an advocacy perspective to make a real difference? Any one of you, please.
All right. I will now talk at a normal speed. And I do want to go back really quickly because this is actually important. Is one thing I forgot to mention is at the southern border and only at the southern border. If you are anyone other than Mexican nationality, there is actually a ban on asylum. So I think it is super important for everyone in the room right now, and maybe this is one of my advocacy issues. Asylum is not a possibility for the vast majority of people crossing the border. There are two other forms of relief that are difficult to get and get us too far, I think, afield. But I think one of the things I want to bring up about those other two forms is your family would not be included. So I think a very good example, and at least I'm a little lucky right now with what I currently do, which is a lot of people don't have families that are supportive. That's not the good part. The good part is they are not traveling with their 4 children. But not so long ago in Texas, a woman from Venezuela won withholding, which is one of those other forms of relief. But the judge found that her 3 children under the age of 7 couldn't get withholding because they did not have the same story as her mother. And her advocates, luckily 1% of people, 1%, actually maybe a little less, have lawyers. She did, which is probably why we even know about it. And she managed to get into the United States, and the government allowed her kids into the United States, but they have orders of deportation. So I think maybe that just became one of, I think people really need to know that. Asylum is not dead, but we're close. And, I went through this kind of labyrinth of policies earlier, just because I think it's important to understand what has happened in the last 18 months. But I think we also can't lose sight of the historicize it a bit. Now is really bad. In the, late 1800s was really bad. It's been really bad before. So we can't forget that. All of the things Trump has done, he has done by building an extra layer of cruelty on a system that already existed. And it was built by our democratic leaders. So one of the things I think we have to do is get locally involved. A lot of what Alyssa said, I was taking notes, because that is, if there's going to be a detention center, it does matter. It matters especially on the local level. If 20 people show up to I'm from a small place, maybe 50, I don't know. But if you show up to community meetings and you show up to city council, small amounts of people really make a difference. So I think that's one thing. But I think you have to also add to that, just try, and I'm happy again afterward, to try and kind of understand some of these concepts. Do you need to know what HARP versus PACER is and who's eligible and who's not? No, I field questions every day from lawyers. So, no, you don't. But I think it is important to know how, I'm every day trying to explain to people, okay, so when you cross the border, I don't know.
That's the quote for the panel.
If this and that and that and that, So I think really just take a little bit of time and try and learn a little bit. Understand the punchline is it's bad. One thing I can think of is bond funds, which helps organizations get people out of detention. If we can get people out of detention, it matters a lot. I can't even express how much it matters. Donating to your local bond fund, I guarantee there is one. Learning what it means to be a sponsor. And that is a lot to take on, basically saying, I am willing to vouch for this person and help them get out of detention. That helps me get people out of detention. It is a lot to take on. But you can host an event at your synagogue or temple or some other community group or child's school, and there's speakers who can come and talk about what it means to be a sponsor. If you yourself can't do it, but you find 4 other people who can, that's 4 people who get out of jail. And then obviously I think it does matter, how we engage in these things is hard, because yes, vote, but showing up every 4 years, 2 years, voting is probably your minimum, I would argue. Get involved in politics. Don't assume people's immigration policies. Ask questions. I do think this is definitely a civil rights issue of our time, and we have a long list of them right now. But immigrants are the ones very often that we can most easily shuffle to the side, and I think politicians certainly can. I think showing what our values are as a nation, I think, I'm not going to assume what our values are at this point. I'm losing a little faith. But just really reiterating, this matters to me. This person might not be voting today, but it matters to me.
I'm going to ask a quick follow-up question to that. So we've heard a lot of good ideas about involvement at the local level, but if you are starting from square one, how do you even know who to ask the questions of, right? How do you know how to find where that bond fund is? How do you know how to find, what it is that, your organization is doing? It's an overwhelming issue, but are there sort of signposts people should be looking for about how to start their involvement?
y'all are looking to me. So.
Well, no, or Emem, or
Yeah.
anyone who's speaking to the value of local engagement. It's hard to get started sometimes.
I can give my 30-second answer, which is honestly faith-based groups. To me, not entirely, but I find, and honestly, it might take you a little. Bond funds, I think you can probably get some recommendations. Call or almost every region. I say that like most regions, maybe not the Southeast, have like call HIAS, call Clinic, call some of these Catholic charities. NIJC, like there are so many organizations just say, I want to get involved, what are, it might take a little bit of work, but I think one thing I wanted to say, and then I'll end there is, I'd love to come to these and say, here are 5 things to do, but change isn't easy, and sometimes it's not easy, so, I do think it's worth a little bit of perseverance, but definitely ask critical questions too. Just because there's an immigration rights organization, that can mean a lot of things. What really are your policy positions? What are the ways I can meaningfully engage? And that's going to be different for different people. So you might have to find your fit.
Yeah, I'd like to lift up what Emem is saying, and that it's all about what your organization is willing to put in, but first and foremost, it's developing relationships with the direct service agencies in your city. And finding out what they need help with, because there are holes, there are service holes, and if your Jewish community can mobilize to help fill those holes, fill those coverage gaps, it is a tremendous service. Also, because I'm focused locally, I'd say, getting to know what the climate is. So, connecting with Catholic charities, they usually send people to the border to do work at the border, and you can go with them. So that's an interfaith trip that is also focused on, an area of policy, an area of issue. And then lastly, I'll do a plug for an agency that I absolutely love. It's an organization called Fast Democracy. And Fast Democracy is an online website where you type in your zip code and you put in which issues you're interested in tracking, and it will track all of the proposed legislation that comes up in your state's your district and your state. They'll send you emails. You can say daily, you can say weekly, you can say monthly. We use this to stay on top of everything that's happening.
Yeah, we all just wrote that down.
Yeah.
And I do want to put a little plug. I brought some HIAS materials. They're on the table back there. So if you are interested in seeking guidance from HIAS about how to do some of this work, our contact information is back there. And we do border delegations as well. So that's a nice little plug. But I was wondering, unless you had something else you wanted to say, I wanted to ask you a pointed question before we open this up in terms of federal advocacy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, if you could touch on that, please.
Yeah, I would love to, and I'm going to use a little visual display if I may. The first thing I will say though is that the local right now, that is where the positive gains are happening, and we see it every day. And so I just would, times 10 everything that you already heard. But there are also meaningful ways to plug in at the federal level. So NIJC is part of a coalition called the Defund Hate Coalition. And what we realized, one of the things, when we all sat down to do some deep dives after the election, sort of where do we go from here, was that we need, and it's unfortunate that this is now a campaign slogan, so forgive me, but we need big structural change in the immigration space. We need a massive decarceration, a massive move away from an enforcement-oriented system. We need more community-based, case management-focused approaches to migration processing. We need to open the border back up to asylum seekers, but that's all a ways off, sadly, right? And so we have to be cognizant of that and realize that in the moment, what we can do is we can limit the dollars that are going towards hateful policies. So the Defund Hate Coalition has as its top line goal cuts to the ICE Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and CBP, Customs and Border Protection's detention and enforcement budgets. So this year, in fiscal year 2020, ICE and CBP's budget is more than $25 billion. And I am looking around the room at these agencies are not very old, right? Like many of us remember when they formed, it used to be INS. In the just about 15 years that these agencies have been in existence, ICE's budget has more than doubled and CBP's has more than tripled. And so these are the monies that are going to fund the policies that you're hearing about at the border that are putting, people like Knalt in jail. So there are ways to plug into this at the local level. And I think that it's been incredible to see the facility with which local organizers are educating members of the community about these budget sort of numbers and policies. Because this chart that I just put up here, so this is a chart that shows the growth of immigration detention centers from the beginning of ICE, the Department of Homeland Security as we know it today, all the way up to, it's a little bit dated now, 2018. And remember it shows that this huge spike here, this is not just the Trump administration, right? So this is going back many years. And the most severe of the spike at the end has been essentially stolen money. So this administration has actually overspent what Congress has appropriated significantly on immigration detention and enforcement by what's called transferring and reprogramming, moving money around. And the Defund Hate Coalition has a ton of materials available I can share with any of you on how to sort of speak in normal English about what that means, right? Which is basically a checks and balances. It's a fundamental problem with our democracy that Congress is giving DHS a certain amount of money and they're kind of laughing and finding money from other places and using it to build more jails. And so I'll just close this out. Last year we were doing a round of meetings on Capitol Hill trying to get Congress to put more accountability language in the appropriations bill to stop DHS from doing these transfers and reprogrammings. And we were meeting with staffers for Senator Tester, who's from Montana, and really important because he's the ranking member on the particular subcommittee that deals with appropriations for DHS. And his lead staffer there was with us, and she was like, look, y'all, I don't know who did it, but Senator Tester just had to answer a question at a local forum at home on what he was doing to stop DHS from transferring money out of FEMA into immigration jails. And she said that it got his attention, in ways that our advocacy here on Capitol Hill wasn't doing. And that was a local faith-based group, in fact, that had really rallied their local members to talk about this transfer and reprogramming issue at local town halls. And it was extremely effective. So if that's an issue that you want to bring to any of your local work, very, very happy to work with you on that.
I love that that's where we're going to end this part of the discussion. I love hearing advocacy stories like that. That warms my heart. So we are now going to open it up for Q&A from all of you. Please just say where you're from, please, and let's get started. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sarah Walters. I'm coming from the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester in upstate New York. I've been in this position for 6 months and I'm fresh out of college, and so I hit the ground running, and I studied international humanitarian law, and I am hearing what you were saying, being like, yes, thank you. But honestly, the biggest issue that I'm encountering is that I have an older contingent of followers for my Community Relations Council and for my Holocaust Education Council. I'm super young to them. They think I'm a child. That's aside the point. But I know.
Said with all due respect.
In a good way.
But you still have a lot to add.
Yeah. What I run into the most is that I think that there's a lot of work that we should be doing that is so much more active than the work that we actually are doing. And we kind of get to a point where people want to do coat drives and then they want to stop. And once I probe into that and ask them why they don't want to do more work, it's because they feel like, oh, well, we support HIAS and the work that they did for Holocaust survivors who are in my family, but now I don't really think that these people should be coming into our country. And I totally disagree with that, but I don't know how to push a community that is kind of more conservative in that way towards being more open. And I wonder if that's something that that Alyssa, that you've run into, or if any of you have suggestions for that. I don't really.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I your struggle resonates. When I came into this position 3 years ago, one of the first programs that I took on was actually coming from HIAS to local organizations, and it was the commemoration of the MS St. Louis. And this, for anyone who doesn't know, the MS St. Louis was a passenger ship of primarily Jews who were fleeing Europe during the rise of Nazism, and they were trying to find a safe home. They originally went to Cuba, were turned away, then tried to get into the United States via Miami, and they were also turned away, tried to go to Canada. Few were accepted, then turned away. So many of them ended up dying in the Holocaust. So what we've done every year is that we've read, forgive me, the actual number escapes me, right, like 375 or 380 people who died. We read their names every single year in remembrance of their plight, in just trying to search for safety, security, home, opportunity. And we connect that directly with the plight of immigrants today. No one wants to leave their home. No one wants to leave their home. And so if you can connect those two things, I think that's a really easy in for getting sort of that, the old school, the people with direct connections to the Holocaust. That's a really easy entry point.
I would say briefly, just very briefly, is like meet them where they're at, first of all. Like they are where they are, and then just, I think be really honest with that, I'm asking you to take little steps with me. And I think education events, just hear from someone, like an example, someone who's like, yeah, I was in my house, didn't plan on doing anything, and then this. And I think those parallels will start to come. And from there, I would say, like, ask them, from those events, ask them what they want to do, right? So here are 10 ways we can partner with other organizations that are immigrant rights organizations who need this. Can we do that? I think that's, and I think once you get people to start taking little steps and they start building relationships, which is something that Alyssa brought up, and I can't underestimate, understate that enough. I think you'll get people there. And some you'll lose and some you'll still have.
And I would also just add, to consider this panel the start of a conversation. We're going to be ending in a few minutes, but this really is meant to be a start of a dialogue. You should feel free, forgive me folks for saying this, you should use all of us as resources afterwards, right? And because the question you asked is something that HIAS deals with almost on a daily basis. We're very fluent in how to talk and have these conversations, so please feel free to reach out. I see you've had your hand up for a while, sir.
I had one observation and two questions. So the observation is that you talked, Heidi, about structural change, and the government is doing it through rulemakings. So one observation is that people should follow not just what the legislation is being proposed, but the dramatic changes in immigration policy that the agency is doing through rulemakings. And so my two questions are, I know Heidi, or Naomi, you have, HIAS has this suit in the federal district court in Maryland, and the government the Supreme Court just knocked down a nationwide rulemaking on the public charge rule. What are your feelings about whether, because you operate in so many different resettlement programs, your chances of having the Mercedes order stand up and not be knocked down because it isn't confined just to Maryland? And then my second question, related to the border and credible fear. Our firm is sending 15 people to the border in April, and they started out a year ago when they were planning this saying, if you got an attorney, it increases your odds of surviving the credible fear interviewed immensely, and now they're saying, well, now we don't have immigration judges who are going to be doing it. What's your approach to that problem?
I will answer your first question very quickly. I mean, I think it would be dangerous of me to be in the prediction business these days for obvious reasons, but you know, we were very pleased by the judge's ruling, obviously, and now this executive order has been enjoined. We have a preliminary injunction. We expect that the government will appeal. That should be coming actually any day now. We're waiting for that. So we don't know how this is going to end. Obviously, recent Supreme Court decisions give us pause, right? But one of the reasons why I'm so proud to work at HIAS is because we're doing the right thing. And we know that it might not end up working in our favor. But in the meantime, the refugee resettlement program is working as it did before. Now, granted, a dismal number of refugees are actually coming in, and that's a whole other conversation.
Cut it by 80%.
Yeah, no, I mean, the numbers are really stark, right? But we have to keep up the fight, and doing it through the courts has proven to be one of the most effective ways to fight this administration. And so we took that decision very carefully. It was not an easy choice, but we'll continue to go to court if that is our primary way of fighting some of these policies. So it remains to be seen, but it should really be any day that we'll see if the government appeals. And I'll leave it.
I guess 3 seconds on credible fear is from when I initially came to the border, then MPP happened, then something else happened. You know, it's like it's always changing. I think lawyers at the border are useful and trust the organizations you're going with to find the best use of your time. So that's all I have to say about that. I mean, and in terms of some of the federal stuff, it's like right now I think there are so many lawsuits, and how to strategically do those. Like, do we try and wait through the next election? You know, the courts are not great, and then we get into judicial appointment conversation. Vote again. But I do think the law will not change our current circumstances. I mean, I was at a thing recently, and someone from a day labor organization called Endelon was just like, sometimes we just want the lawyers to make everything take a while. You know, and that was a conversation around TPS. So law is invaluable, but everyone in this room anyone who is not a lawyer at these local levels and state levels and federal levels, you're the ones who are going to change a lot of this. Because right now we don't have like an NAACP Brown versus Board of Education strategy happening with the right Supreme Court. So I don't want to undervalue what those lawsuits are doing because they're invaluable, but they're not going to fix it. Probably.
Sir, with your hand up. Yeah.
So my name is Neil Borovitz. I'm a retired rabbi and a JCPA board member. One of the things that I'd like to see all of you be able to do, and hopefully since this is recorded, we can get this out into the field. But Alyssa, you made a point on the side that's really important. The American Jewish community were rightly focused, obsessed on the rise of anti-Semitism and feeling alone out there. That's what we all heard about and talked about this morning. The fact is that I wrote an op-ed in the Times of Israel right after the HIAS lawsuit got some positive feedback. I think that one of the most important things about the HIAS lawsuit was you didn't do it by yourself.
Right.
That we're doing it with other faith-based groups. And I think that one of the things I'd like to see a plan coming out of HIAS and perhaps in partnership with JCPA is how do we create on the ground local, we got 125 JCRCs. How do we get local coalitions working through Catholic Charities and HIAS and other groups working together on these issues? We shouldn't be looking to get Jewish trips to the border. We should be looking to bring interfaith groups to the border, because then we can really be doing something, doing the right thing. It's a Jewish value, as Naomi started off to say. But we can also do it for to help ourselves in some of the other issues we're facing. And I think putting the face of Jewish values and the face of the good stuff we're doing out there and working together is one of the keys that I'd love to see more things coming out of HIAS, and JCPA can probably be a good conduit for that.
Yeah, I take that feedback. It's really important. A couple things to note. At the national level, we do multi-faith partnerships every day. It's in our, like, we could do it in our sleep, right?
Right.
So our co-plaintiffs, Church World Service, representing the mainline Protestant community, the Lutheran Refugee Organization, we are in touch with them multiple times a day. The same with the Catholics. 6 out of the 9 national resettlement agencies are faith-based. We also partner directly with the evangelical arm, their refugee organization. I mean, the list goes on, right? So at the national level, that is just part and parcel of what we do.
Yeah,
but you point, I know, but you point to a very important challenge, which is that doesn't always trickle down. Sometimes our community work is a little bit insular, and that is something that we are very aware of, and we are already talking through strategies about how to change that. So I really do take your feedback, because your finger is really on the pulse of sort of what the next frontier for that work should really look like. So I appreciate that.
Can I just make a quick note, because I think I'll regret it if we leave here without saying it. You started your question, by invoking the work that's being done by so many in this room against the rise of anti-Semitism, and I know we're all connecting these dots, but I just want to connect them in the clearest way possible, which is that when the president in public statement invokes words like hordes to talk about asylum seekers who are arriving at the border, I think it is incumbent upon every single one of us in this moment sitting in this room to recognize that there is a dehumanization, an intentional dehumanization coming from our government directed at brown and black migrants, Central American and African migrants. That is, to me at least, as a Jewish person doing migrant rights work, frighteningly reminiscent of the beginnings of Nazi rhetoric towards the Jews. And that it makes my heart beat really fast to say it out loud, and I know we all recognize it, but I think saying it out loud as often as we can now and recognizing the gravity of it is something that we can do in our own communities and in partnership with other faith communities as well.
Okay, maybe one more question if there is one, otherwise we will wrap up. I swore I would wrap us up on time, but I don't want to stop the conversation abruptly.
Were you raising your hand or looking?
I am just scratching the side.
Okay, you with the green pants, you get the honor in the final question.
Okay.
Go for it, Diane.
Okay. Non-cooperation of your local police with ICE is something really important in Silicon Valley. Our county has a detainer policy and that where there is non-cooperation, but it's still a really controversial issue, and I think it's hard sometimes to explain to people who think that the government is probably doing the right thing, and so do you have a good way to articulate?
Speaking on behalf of the Federation of Charlotte, I second that question, because you're probably familiar with that. We literally have a new sheriff in town who's elected on the issue of not working with ICE, and then Raleigh said, that's cute, and then all the stuff still going on. So I like to second that question.
Where are you from?
Charlotte.
Sorry. Northern California, Silicon Valley.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, we could have a whole hour panel on this, but I'll just say, email me. There's so much materials out there, and there's so much messaging. But the one thing that I've been relying on a lot when I talk about sanctuary policies recently is this great study that I invoked earlier that came out of UC Davis. It's a very robust study that looked at basically sanctuary jurisdictions and non-sanctuary jurisdictions. So you have this spectrum of the extent of the cooperation of local law enforcement and federal immigration enforcement, ICE. And basically what they found is that there's either no reduction in crime rates for those places like Maricopa County, Arizona that are all in on cooperating with ICE. There's either no reduction in crime rates or there might be a slight uptick in crime rates, which is not surprising.
Which is what
because the whole whole thing is about chill factors. It's about when local police are co-opted as federal immigration enforcement agents, the undocumented community and their loved ones becomes very scared, and it becomes unsafe to go to the police. And when it becomes unsafe to go to the police, we are all less safe. And so that's, basically one of the ways that I talk about it, is that's what that study shows, and it's really not surprising what that study shows. And so we can, please do email me.
just want to get the study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you get that study to?
Or can we put it on
that
put it on the
can-
app
Yeah,
for this
either put it on
session?
the app or send it out to.
So, so the answer is yes. I do not know how, but the
I'll
answer is
post
yes.
it there
so
after you get it.
Talk to Heidi.
Yeah, we'll
I'll agree right on this.
no, we'll get it done. Okay, I have been told in no uncertain terms we need to end on time, so thank you so much for coming. Our next panel, we're doing the exact same panel in 15 minutes, so we are going to be here. So if you have more questions, please come up, and thank you.
So I'll be posting in the notes from the panel when we have.
It's a very
You're the ones to blame.
I know.
He's getting
Oh, I know. There's one I'm glad you kept it right
The amount of freaking assistance I get,
Yeah.